In this video, we're going to talk about lighting and rendering. And lighting and rendering encompass a few things. It also encompasses shaders. So rendering is the process of taking your models, taking your shaders and your light, and kind of turning into an image, say like we have here. And this is the example file we'll be working with, and the image we'll be trying to light here. And we have a few different things going on here. We have some ambient occlusion going on. We have final gather going on. We have an environmental sky in here, and some different types of lights. And we'll talk about all of those and how they all kind of work together. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and here's our 3D scene. Everything's pretty basic, as far as the models and everything go. I'm waiting for Maya to wake up here. There we go. So some of the stuff is denser than the others, but most of it's pretty simplistic. Some of it's more game model-y, some of it's more realistic. This is pretty dense for a game model, but whatever. Here's kind of the basics. You'll notice here, like, some of the edges are beveled, and let me jump into models first. So this is sort of the first part. So here's our scene, and everything's inside a box, and I'll talk about that in a second. At least for this room. If there was a house or whatever, I'd build it out more, but I tried to make sure it's enclosed. And there's some stuff out here for background stuff, and it doesn't have to be super fancy with the way we're rendering. I think the sky is probably not copyright legit here at this point. I think it's from like some anime, but it had decent clouds for the style, and lighting also I stole it for the sake of this tutorial, which I don't know, I don't think I'm making a profit off this, so I think I should be okay anyway. Same with Cat Pope in there, just picture off the internet to fill up that picture frame. So inside here, everything is self-contained inside of a box, and if there was more room here, I'd have it, but mostly I'm just closing this off so that when we have daylight bouncing around, it's there's not daylight seeping in from the side because it's a giant open wall. There's something there to block the light, to get it to be a little bit more realistic. Let's see. So beveling things. So you'll notice a lot of these edges are beveled. So by beveled, they don't come to a hard point. They have a face in between. Same with the walls. This desk has it all over the place. And the reason for that is this catches light much better. If you have just an infinitely sharp edge, it's kind of going to look like that, but nothing in real life is actually like that. And there's usually some sort of edge there to catch a nice little highlight or something like that. So if you're doing a more realistic render, it's really great to have these in here. So this is straddling the line of I've got a game character in here. I think the trees that I grabbed are game models, but this is a little bit more realistic room as far as all the props go. So at least you can kind of start to see the difference of one to the other. And there's some ways to start to do this stuff in gaming, but it's not as important as when we're rendering a nice crisp image. So as far as lighting, there's a few lighting rendering shaders. It's all part of the same package. So the shaders are defining what the material is, so how it reflects light. So the comforter is going to be a different material than the wood. That's going to be a different material than this curtain or this baseball mitt, or the glass on here. So defining those properties. So like there's actually a sheet of glass in here. We're defining how transparent it is, how much it reflects light, how much it reflects things that are inside the room, so we can actually see a mirror image, or is it just barely catching a reflection? So bump map. This isn't a flat object, so it actually has a bump texture to it. And I'm not going to go a whole lot into shaders, but they're a very important part of your lighting. They're going to dictate how light reflects off of this thing, and that's what dictates how it looks. If you look around any objects that you have maybe around you, you could see that things might have little micro bumps that reflect light at different angles to make it kind of like sparkly or speckled. If you have paint on your walls, if it's a roller versus spray on, roller's going to look lumpier than spray on, and light's going to bounce off at different angles, cast little shadows, all those sorts of things. If it's you might see in some glossy surfaces, even though they're not mirror-like, you're seeing this blurry kind of vague reflection of things around being reflected back in it. So those are all materials you set up in your shaders. So let me talk a little bit about that first. And so where you set up your shaders is Window, Rendering Editors, Hyper Shade. And let that open up. In here we have all our shaders. So everything in here has its own shader. Some objects have a couple shaders, like this lamp. Where is it? It has several shaders on it. It has a shader for the chord, shader for the base, shader for the actual shade, shader for the bulb inside. And let's actually go look at this, because this has several parts. So like this part out here is going to be glass. So I combine this all to one thing just for easier show and tell of the outliner for you guys. But originally it was separated up into several models. But if I grab this guy is just going to be a white surface shader. So it's pure white. And the reason for that is I'll put a light inside here, but a light in 3D is not the same as a light in real life, where if you look straight at the light, it's usually a hot glowing piece of metal that's inside a vacuum tube, and that all that energy going through the tube is what's generating the light. Well, we don't have that in here. So I could put a light in here, and we'll pull out, and it looks like it's casting light all around, but we'll go in here, and it'll be as bright as anything else. It's not going to be, this white hot glowing thing. So I've put a white hot glowing thing inside there, via shader, to start to simulate that. And likely we have the shading here, so I don't have to deal with that. But there are settings in the light that I'll talk about that can start to mimic that. But think about that as you're doing, because a lot of the stuff isn't reacting how it actually is in the real world. It's simulating it to some effect, as opposed to doing real calculations, which would take forever. So if you're looking here, so you can use whatever shaders you want. So if you're, the good standbys are Blinn for anything with specularity. If you don't want specularity, you can put a Lambert. Anisotropic is good for metal and glass sometimes. And then there's some other stuff. I can do a ton of videos on shaders, but I don't know if we'd get anywhere specific by doing that. And there's plenty of stuff out there. So I may not do one, but do your research out there. There's lots of shaders. There's sites out there like Creative Crash that have free custom shaders that people have made in different setups. So look around. Let's look at some of these real quick. And I'm going to open up the attribute editor for this. So we have color. This is also often called diffuse. Same thing. Diffuse or color is essentially just whatever, just straight color. Like the surface shader that I have is just straight color. It won't get any shading on it. Where is it? There's my surface shader. And this is, it's represented by a sphere. All these other ones are shaded or have shininess on them. This one has nothing. It's just pure color. It's whatever color I set it to, in this case, white. So in the Blinn, we can set how transparent it is. So you can see as we turn that up and down, more transparent, less transparent. Ambient color is kind of like a glow. It's like going between this to this. If you start here, and as you turn ambient color up, you go all the way to here and start to ignore the shading. So this is good for things that maybe need to have like a slight glow to them or something like that, or you just need to stand out a little bit more in the dark. But kind of think of it like if it was I don't know, like some sort of weird lava rock thing that's glowing. You might turn up the ambient color in some spots. Incandescence is it actually glowing light. So some of the settings of Mental Ray, what I'll do is I'll make bounce cards with this. So like if you're doing a car ad, you make a polygon plane, and bounce cards will bounce actual light off. But in this case, ours will actually just be glowing. So I'll turn the color up to white, incandescence up to white, and then make it so the card itself doesn't render, but then it's bouncing light and gets nice highlights, that catches in eyes or reflections of metal and things like that. And by the way, research your real photography studio setups. All that stuff can be recreated and simulated in here, and that's how you get that stuff to look really nice, to start to follow how you do it in real life. Okay, so anyway, moving on. Bump mapping is simulating a surface that's going up or down. So it's a black and white map, and the more to white it is, the more straight up it's going. The more black it is, the more it is with the original surface. If you know your game stuff, there's normal maps as well, which uses a color to say, hey, rather than being flat, if you're yellow, you're actually facing off this direction. If you're red, you're facing off this direction. Blue's this direction. Green's this direction. I don't know if those are actual the directions, but those are the colors. And then you have parallax mapping, which is both of those combined, because normal maps are saying a direction, but bump mapping is saying a height. And when you combine those two, you get a lot better sense of depth. But that's usually more of a game thing. Diffuse in this case, a little bit tricky. So again, watch the shading. There is how much of that do you want or don't want. I tend to leave this at the default. Translucency is what this lampshade should be. It'll be it's not transparent, but light shines through it. So cloth is often translucent. What else is translucent? Window blinds, paper is translucent. A number of things. And translucent depth is how far that light goes through before it starts to cut off. Translucent focus is how much it blurs as it's going through that thing that it's translucent. We have specular shading, so eccentricity is kind of how much does that highlight spread across the surface. Specular roll-off is kind of like how much does that catch. So like leather is going to have a really low specular roll-off, or metal is going to have a much higher one. Specular color, so usually you just turn this up and down from white, but you could actually change this to color if you wanted to, like maybe some sort of iridescent metal or something like that. Reflectivity is how much objects are actually reflected in there, and reflected color I think is kind of whatever that background color is to that. I don't know, I haven't actually played with that much. And that's kind of the gist of all these. Lambert has some of these too, it just doesn't have all the specularity stuff, so if you don't want to deal with that, you can just get that out of there. These work great for a lot of things. We're going to be doing a rendering in Mental Ray in this case. I haven't used Maya software is okay. You can get some decent render times out of it, and I've seen some people do some really good stuff out of it. I'm not, at least the way I've been using it, I haven't seen, in this day and age, render quality come out of Maya software for the setups that I get. Worth it or worth the time, versus what I get out of Mental Ray. Though the render times may be a little bit higher in Mental Ray, it's just the quality stuff stands out so much better. This to me looks, I mean, if this was the final render, this looks like garbage. I mean, this is horrible color and everything looks really flat, but the colors just don't seem to go to this, and partly some of them aren't showing. But that's it's that kind of stuff that gets us from that to that's the wrong window to this previous render I did. So this starts to work a whole lot better. And it's all the same thing. It's just you can kind of see like here's the texture without any lighting on it. So I like Mental Ray for the bang for my buck. So this is my take on Mental Ray, but there may be better ways to do this. When I say better, I mean probably more efficient ways if time's an issue. Using Mental Ray, I like to use the MIA material. So up here we have all these Maya shader things. In Mental Ray, these are all valid, and especially utility nodes. There's no reason you still can't use these. But here's the regular Maya shaders. I'll still use Surface Shader. But then we also have Mental Ray shaders, and these only render Mental Ray. And so let me show you real quick what I'm talking about here. So if I go up here to this little clapboard with the two little radio dials by it, and click that, that's our render settings menu. So right now we start out in Maya software by default. Right here it says render using, and I'm going to switch over to Mental Ray, and that's a different rendering engine. So it's now using different software than it did before to render stuff. It's kind of like saying I'm using the Crytek engine versus I'm using the Unreal engine, if you need sort of a video game reference for the equivalent here. And the nice thing about Mental Ray is it can use all the Maya shaders for the most part, but it can also use its own shaders that do some nicer stuff. And so what I've done here is I've used MIA Material X for all my shaders. And let me go ahead and make one of these here. I like these better. For the most part, there's some things I can't do when I revert back to Blinn. Like these have transparency settings on them, and for the life of me, I can never get them to look right, so I usually go back to Blinn when I need something transparent. And there's some other shaders, but for everything in here, for the most part, I've just thrown on MIAs because I like some of the control stuff better, but for half these things, I'd say There's probably not a whole lot of difference between how I set them up. I think this does glass a whole lot better when you're rendering with ray tracing. Yeah, I mean it's a pretty close call with some of these, like this picture frame and these, the wall stuff. Who really cares which one I use? But just for consistency's sake, on this video, I'm using the Mia material for the most part, except for a couple things like the curtains and that lampshade, I think. So let me go through these settings real quick. So under diffuse, we have color. Again, this is just the straight color. If I want to mute it out a little bit more, I can just turn this down. Roughness is kind of like a graininess. It adds to the texture if I want it a little bit more grainy rather than clean. Reflection is kind of both the glossiness, but also how mirror-like it is at the same time. So it's a little bit different than the blend. And again, this is the color it's reflecting. And you can see it's a little bit different how it's handling. I turn the reflectivity up and down. And then the glossiness, that's where it really starts to hit that hot spot there. But if I turn these all the way down, that's how I start to get rid of that. So if I didn't want any highlight on this, I could turn this all the way down. But it's, different combinations of this to kind of define what this material is going to end up looking like. Let's see, what else is there? So also, if you want to tweak this and I want a really sharp highlight like that, but I don't want it to be reflective, I could turn on highlights only, and now it's not going to be mirror-like anymore. It's going to just give you the kind of the hot spot from the lights. Let's see, index of refraction. So light refracts off of different objects at different angles depending what that material is. So light refracts off a certain kind of glass at different angles, different kinds of metals, and you can actually go do Google searches for like, what's the index of refraction for aluminum or something like that, and look up the number and actually go get that to start to get more realistic numbers to set to this. I don't know what any of these are by default, but usually I could Google search and come up with something close, or some material that's kind of like the thing I'm looking for, and find a number to punch in here. So think like car paint. Car paint is a good example of, at certain angles it catches the highlight from the edge of the car paint rather than from up here. It was really reflective on the edge, and then not here, but then kind of is straight ahead also. Index of refraction would start to give you that kind of stuff. Well, speaking of car paint, there is a bunch of mental ray car paint shaders that are great for metallic paints and all that sort of stuff, or cars. So if you're doing anything like that, just use one of these. One of these is great for that. The X underscore on these, by the way, means that you can attach bump maps to them. So this one, no bump maps. This one, same stuff with bump maps. As we go down here, we have ambient occlusion is one of the other things that I really like about this. So I could go on Mental Ray and say turn on ambient occlusion, and we'll render all this with ambient occlusion on, and I'll talk about that in a little bit here when we get to it. But just here's the start of mainly why I'm using the MIA. I could turn this on per shader, and then I could control it, per an object of how the ambient occlusion works. So this is probably the main reason I use the MIA, because it has ambient occlusion attached to it, where none of the blend or anything does, and that way, so I could individually tweak different objects rather than have it to the whole scene. Whole scene might render faster, I'm not sure, but I just like the tweaking ability. And we have bump down here, so if you're going to add a bump map, I should just use overall bump, and it works the same way as any other bump map in Maya. If you're looking at normal maps, you can do that in here too. And yeah, if you're not sure about any of this stuff, look it up. There's a lot of resources online for this stuff. Anastrophe, if I can pronounce it. That is like, you see metal that's like like somebody took a disc grinder to polish it. You often see it like on elevator doors and stuff like that. It looks all swirly and like kind of holographic. That's what that is, or like a CD or stuff like that. So that's what this setting's supposed to do. There's a bunch of different stuff for this. There's a lot of other settings in here. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's kind of it for that. So, set up all my textures for this, and I even did it for my character. And so, something I should point out here, this character is referenced in. So, if we go File, Reference Editor, this character is referenced in. So that means his shaders aren't part of this scene. So when I switched out his shaders, I did it back in the original character file. So I saved off a copy, replaced all his blend shaders or Lamberts, whatever he had, with MIA shaders. So you can see, yep, here they are referenced in because I have the reference suffix on them. So here's the key with referencing. Do not reference something in and then replace its shader in the scene you're referencing it into. You're going to run into a whole lot of bugs with that because Maya won't be able to reconcile that if you go back to the original file and change the shaders there. Do all the shader changing back there. If you want to change some settings in here, that's fine, but don't switch off any of the textures. Don't change the textures in here. Do that in the original file. Don't change the type of shader applied to a material in here. Do it in the original file. Because if you do it in here first and then you go back and change something in the original file, well, Maya can't reconcile that. It's like, well, you updated it back over here, but there's changes over here. I don't know which one to go use, and the one it might pick may not be the one that you want. So be consistent about that. Now, if you're in here and say, what, I need the reflectivity higher, that's okay. But don't go in and change the texture on the color because that'll change between the reference and the original. Settings aren't such a big deal. That's kind of all I got to say on that. So just be aware of that because you could really kind of paint yourself into a corner with your shaders not updating right. And then usually the case once you go down that road is unreference the character, reference in a fresh one, and just reset everything up because Maya is just too confused about which shaders to use. So referencing is a really powerful thing. I still recommend using it. You just got to use it properly. So the keys again to come in: don't change the shaders, the actual shader. So don't switch this shader to be a blend and apply it to the material in this referencing. Go back to your original referenced file, the John Doe scene that I have. Change your shaders there. Come back in here, and then if you want to change some numbers, sure, but don't swap out textures. Don't swap out shaders in reference scenes. Okay, so here's all the textures. So if you guys want to look through them, feel free in the sample, but I'm not going to go through too much more here. Almost all of these have bump on them. So here's a carpet, but it's not just the carpet. Let me go ahead and map this here. So it's the same texture. It's just pump through a bump map and going into the color channel. It's also tiled and repeating. So I'm not going to go into making tile textures here. Maybe I'll make a video on how I do that later, but I'm having, so every time you add a image file, it comes with the image and then this plays 2D texture. Under repeat UV, I'm telling it to repeat 15 times. So rather than them being projected once across this whole plane, it's repeating 15 times to be smaller and repeating. And so is the bump. So I think it's going the same amount. Though I could offset them if I want. If it just looked weird with them lining up, I could say, hey, you repeat 15 times, you repeat, I don't know, 14 or 16, so they don't quite line up the same, but then it has bump. But for this carpet, it's fine. You shouldn't really be able to notice that. So the walls have bump. I think everything has bump, and then just in a pinch, I'm using the color map just to give it some sort of texture. Or I think in this blanket, I'm using some sort of plush fur texture I found online and made a tile out of, so that has that on there. But things shouldn't be flat. Nothing is naturally flat. Well, plastics and things like that are, but even then, up close, they could have a really fine little bump that's very subtle. So a lot of the time, where is it? When we look at my bump maps, bump depth. So this starts out at 1. You can see I turned it down to 0.1. So it's just real subtle. Some of these might even be more subtle than that. Let me see. What I set this to. No, it's even more so. What did I set the walls to? By the way, always name your shaders because you see I'm trying to go through now, and at least I know this one's named wall, so I know it's going to be down under W. Nope, that one's 1, 2. So I don't know, but you can see my texture is pretty light here. I just used a fractal, but it's it's nearly flat gray. It has something to it, but it's very subtle. So the difference is not a lot of contrast in the texture here, so this can be up high. Oh, and by the way, if you're going to do normal map, that's where you can start to do this in here. And there's a couple differences between tangent space normals and object space normals. I can't remember which one's which, but I think one will stay fixed to the model, and the other one changes based on your camera angle, which probably looks weird most of the time. So I think that's the quick rundown on shaders here. So you need those to define what the materials look like, because that will define how the light bounces off them. So that's always the first part of setting up a scene. The next part is actually adding in lights. So let's go ahead and render this and see what it looks like. So by the way, so I'm in my perspective camera right now. I always use this camera to just fly around with. I don't use it to render with, because while I'm testing my render, I may not want to move my camera, but I may want to go move a prop and go, that's better over there, or go select something to change a shader on it, or like I think when I first added this, the UVs were backwards, so I had to zoom out and grab this thing and flip the UVs, stuff like that. So have your render camera, so make your camera create cameras, default camera aim, whatever you need, but then don't touch that for moving. Once you have your shot, keep it the same. So I'm going to see what this looks like right now without adding anything into it yet. Let's see. I need to open this up. So we're in Mental Ray, and the first thing is, so rendering takes time every time you do it, and it might be like, well, this is only 30 seconds here and a minute here, but when you got to do like 30, 40, 60 renders just to see how things are looking, that time adds up really fast. So keep your quality down low. So by default, we're on preview here. Stay on preview as long as you can. This will be able to tell you a lot. It won't look great, but when I put all my lights in and turn the render quality up, it could take as much as 10 minutes a frame. I don't want to do that the whole time I'm doing this. It'll take forever. So a single frame should seem small, but especially when you do animation, that gets even higher and higher. But a lot of setting up light is rendering, seeing how it looks, change some numbers, position some things. Do a render, see how it looks, change the numbers, position some things, render it, see how it looks. So just so over here on the quality tab under Mental Ray, quality presets, just go to preview. You could even do some things like draft, but I think preview is probably a good one to start to get a good idea. But if you have a really big scene, draft might be the way to go. And we'll talk about some of these other settings as we go also. So let me see if anything renders. Sometimes Mental Ray will render something without lights added, and sometimes it just turns out black. So I don't know what the difference is, but let's see what happens. Okay, so there's our first render. Looks horrible, doesn't it? This looks like some really bad video game with no lighting, which is essentially kind of what it is at the moment. You can see it took 13 seconds to render this. And yeah, it's not great yet. So we're going to add some stuff to this, and I'm going to save this render right here. So if I use this little icon right here, the little green one, you see it says keep image. I'm going to click that, and I can save this. So, and just FYI, as we go forward, I might start pausing this video during the render time, so you guys don't have to watch these all render, because when they start taking a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes as we add stuff in here, that'll get boring. So hopefully I'll just be able to cut that stuff out. Okay, so here's the start of our scene. So what's the first thing we're going to do? So in this case, I have outdoors to my scene. It's not a big part of my scene, but I have daylight that will be coming through this window, and in theory, the rays of the sun are bouncing around this room and creating light. We're not going to do that for real in Maya, but we are going to start to simulate it. So let me jump out here. Use my perspective camera again. So this is my moving around one. And go ahead and, let's see, go back into your render settings. And there's a tab over here called Indirect Lighting. And there's Physical Sun and Sky. I'm going to go ahead and create one of these. And so that made all these settings plus, where is it? Looking for my outliner. There we go. Makes this light. And this is just a directional light. So what a directional light is a light that, I'm going to go ahead and scale it up here so we can see it a little bit better. And it doesn't really matter what the scale of this thing is. Because what a directional light does is just say, light is coming from everywhere from this angle. There's no one source. It's just, it's kind of like how the sun works, on when we're looking at it. I mean, the sun is one source, but not from all directions. But this is like the direction the sun is pointing right now and lighting the whole world, which is a little bit different than, say, like a spotlight, which kind of acts more like a flashlight and say, well, it lights at, this will light up the thing I'm pointing it at. So this is the direction the sun's at. Let's just think of it that way. But this is part of the physical sky too, so we're going to get a lot of bounce light and things like that that we wouldn't have otherwise. Oh, you know what? Let me do something here, because I still have something attached to my camera, I believe. Nope. Okay, I think I deleted it. Okay, good. So I'll talk about that in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself now. So let's position this light to where we want to come in, and in this case, I want it to kind of come in to the window. Now, the other thing is I got to kind of keep my background, and I picked this background specifically because I like, one, the horizon kind of matches the horizon I have, and two, the light angle is kind of coming in the way that I want. And I don't know how many times I've seen this where people just don't account for this, where, like, I don't know, sun's coming in this direction, but then they have lights like this, or clouds like this, that say, hey, actually no, light's coming from this angle up over here, kind of towards the back, not, towards the front here. So according to these clouds, light's kind of coming from an angle, roughly somewhere in here. Not this way. They're not facing that way because we see shadows over here. They're definitely not facing that way. So be aware of that. If you do go grab an image, make sure it matches the angle your lighting's at. Otherwise, those will look real weird because all your shadows will be cast this way, but shadows in your clouds are casting the other way. Okay, so let's go ahead and position this thing. So you could also make a directional light on its own, and it's the same kind of thing. I tend not to use them because they get to be expensive. Not on their own. So by default, they're not that expensive, but if we want to cast shadows, then it is, because what happens with shadows is we're basically saying, hey, I'm going to specify a number of rays for you to cast out, and whatever those rays hit, that's how you're going to find a shadow. And so spotlight's not too bad because you know which area it's hitting, and it's like, I don't know, do 20 rays for that, and that'll be enough to cast nice, good-looking shadow here. But a direction light has to do the whole scene, so you could easily say, like, here's 100 rays, here's 1,000 rays, and it may or may not work for your whole scene, which every ray is just another calculation it has to do, so that could add up real fast. So I try to, if I'm doing something like the sun, I'll use a directional light, but I'll try to keep it to, only one if possible. Point lights are kind of the same thing because, well, they're not casting everywhere. They cast out in all directions as opposed to a spotlight, which, so a point light's kind of like a light bulb. It's just this little orb that shines light every direction. So again, shadows on it are expensive. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking here and start working because nothing's more exciting than watching a video where somebody talks the whole time. And let's see, if I want to, I could do, does it look at selection? No. I'm looking for something that I have totally forgotten where it's at. Okay, I'm going to pause real quick and come back to you guys. And I'm back, and it was right in front of me. Okay, so panels, look through selected, and now I can look through this light. Well, I'm a little bit rotated, but whatever. I'm just mostly trying to point it through the window, so I'm getting a nice ray on the window cast onto the bed. Maybe I'll come back here a little bit. Whoops. But it's kind of like using your camera. I'm not too worried that I'm sideways, I just care that it's aiming in. So, jump back to my perspective camera. Let's call that good. It's kind of close. Okay, so we'll call that good. And let's see. Oh, so there was all those settings that came with the indirect sky. So let's go back and look at those. And so I already made one. I don't want to click delete or I'll get rid of it. But if I click this little arrow here, indirect lighting, physical sun and sky, this little arrow, it takes me back to all my settings for my physical sun and sky. So there's RGB, well, yeah, let me talk about these first. So RGB unit conversion, this is adding more color to it. So if you wanted a really blue sky for some reason, or red sky, since it's an alien planet, you could shift the colors to make it more or less one of these. Or, I don't know, nightclub scene, and then like the green light's really heavy or something. Be aware, very, very little color goes a whole long way in these settings. You'll notice that for default sunlight, it's 0001 for any one of these colors right now. If you added, took away one of these zeros, like if I, turned red up by just taking one zero, so it's 001, that whole scene would look very, very red all of a sudden. So just be aware of that. It takes, if you want to tint it red a little bit, try 001, 3 zeros, a 1, and maybe a 2 at the end. And that'll do quite a bit there. So it's very little. So haze is kind of, think LA. The higher you tune this number, the closer you are to LA in the evening, with pollution fog or China or whatever. And honestly, I can't remember what all these settings do. Saturation is just how saturated you want the colors in the light. Horizon height, I like to turn this down a little bit, say -1, because what it does is essentially makes the horizon for sky, and then you have kind of a ground color underneath. There's actually a sphere that goes over. I like to pull it down a little bit just to make sure it isn't above my actual plane. So -1's fine, and then you can start to blur that a little bit. Night color, sun direction. So there's a lot of different stuff in here. Again, read up. I'm just kind of brushing over a lot of this, but the default settings work great for me on this a lot of the time. I mean, if you're changing the mood to sunset or something like that, add some more reds to it. But this is you could have another tutorial completely on just MIA physical sky. So we're kind of breezing over a lot of this stuff, but you'll get to see what this does. So let's jump back into our camera 1 here, and see what this did to our scene. We're rendering, and this is going to take a little bit longer now. So it was 13 seconds before. Let's see what we're at now. And I just realized I'm rendering or recording. So let's see what that. Oh, I did the scene once. We'll see what happens to my render times after this. So you already see it's taken a lot longer with that sky in there. I've tried to do this before with just directional lights, not doing the sky. And to get something close to this, it definitely looks different. But to get something close to this, the shadows end up being a lot harsher. I was actually getting higher render times. So, while this still is already taking a lot longer, looks better than, say, adding in 3 lights to kind of get all this natural bounce light that we get by default from this. So there we go. That's just sun. So the thing I want to point out, that you may notice already, so here's what we had before to this, is just, here's this blanket. This looks really washed out compared to the texture I have here. This is much closer to the actual colors that I have. This feels like it kind of throws like a warm gray on everything. I mean, given we haven't lit this whole scene yet, then this is just kind of handling the light coming from outside. You see we have some translucency happening here. There's some nice shadows outside. But it's kind of washing out our image. So we'll keep that in mind, but I'm going to add a couple more lights in here and just kind of worry about the lighting quality at first before doing anything else. And also notice that jacked our render time up to just over a minute. So went from 13 seconds to a minute. So this is something you always want to keep your eye on, because one, we're on preview settings, not final quality settings. And if I'm doing an animation, if let's say on the low end, if you're doing animation, you could probably get away with 15 frames a second. That's like Flash animation that you see on the web. Kind of the lowest common denominator you can get to before your eye starts to see skipping. TV and regular animation are 24 frames a second. So for 1 second animation, it would take 24 minutes to render that if I was using just the settings. And then 30 frames a second is probably a more common thing for smoother animation. A lot of stuff on the web is 30 frames a second. Video games are running at 60 frames a second. So to do that is going to really bring this up, our render times up. So if you're doing a minute of animation, It's taking a minute for a 30th of a frame if you're doing 30 frames a second. Start to do the math, because that'll add up real quick and eat into your deadlines. So you got to be aware of those issues and how long it actually takes. Sometimes you'll like, well, this isn't too bad render time. This isn't so bad now, but when you actually have to go render your whole animation, you do the math and realize, oh crap, I need like 2 days to render this on my machine, and I can't use it the whole time. So always keep on this. Our goal is to keep this as low as possible, but get the quality high, and that's always a balance job. But there are other options. I'll talk about those later for making sure you get your renderings out, which may not be you, but we'll get into that. So here's our rendering. So we were here. This is without a sun, any lights in here. Here's our first light. It's a physical sun. We start to get some nice mood lighting here. And I'll go ahead and minimize this. And so let me talk about our different types of lighting. So you've probably heard these terms before: key light, fill light, and backlight. Otherwise referred to as 3-point lighting. The mistake people often make is that means there's 3 lights. Those are 3 bulletin points, not 3 lights. Key lights kind of give your overall lighting to something. So, like if you're on stage, the key light's the spotlight. Spotlight directly lights you. The spotlight, though, only gives you really kind of harsh shadows. So you have, a lot of light here and then nothing back here, and you just get black back here. Fill lights kind of fill in the detail here. So it's not completely obscured by blackness, but you have, so if we had a spotlight up here, let's say it's at 1, we have a fill light over here, maybe it's somewhere between 0.2 and 0.5 to kind of fill in some of the stuff we can't see, so we don't have this hardline shadow going down the side where the spotlight cuts off. Maybe some back here, just anywhere, like sometimes even 0.1, just maybe 2-3 lights, just kind of making sure you could see things enough. And then backlight is, so imagine if the wall was blue or the bed's blue or something like that, his shirt would be blending in with it. Backlight is a bright light often that catches rim light on things to help break them out from the background. And so we'll start to do these things. But you could have like 100 key lights or 100 fill lights or 100 backlights in your scene to get it lit properly. Now, mind you, you probably don't want that because that'll turn your render times up really high. But big sets and stuff like that, sometimes that's what it takes to do that. At least maybe not all of those together, but maybe because you actually have lights in there, in a building or something lighting up a scene. So okay, so that is my perspective camera. Let's start to add some of these other lights. So I made these walls so I could hide them. I'm going to go find my layer here. Oh, did I not actually add that on the layer? Okay, let me add selected objects layer. I think I did, and then I didn't because I had the ceiling as that piece, but I'm leaving that on. So this just makes it easy to fly around. Again, those walls aren't really there to be part of the scene. They're there to just kind of block light from bouncing in from that physical sky. So let's go ahead and work with the first type of light that I'm going to add in here, which is, so create lights. So we did a directional light with our physical sky. It's automatically created with that. And next one I'm going to make is called an area light. So everything always starts at the origin, so I just grab my move tool right away, and these are all kind of small by default. So remember how I was talking about bounce cards before? This is kind of what this is. Think of this. So it's, the spotlight's kind of like almost like a flashlight, or like a stage light, but you can see the ring around it. Think of this kind of like a big fluorescent light. This really doesn't do shadows that much as far as what's casting. It kind of casts all over the place. But I'm going to kind of put this up as if there's a ceiling light or something up here that we can't see. But I'm also going to focus it on the character. So, my angle's over here, and my main focus is him. So I'm going to have this light aim at him, this angle. We're not going to get harsh shadows from this, I don't believe. By the way, none of these have shadows on turned by default. If we go and hit Control A to open up the attribute editor, we see shadows down here. There's 2 types. There's depth map shadows, which generates a texture of your choosing size and projects where the shadows are in that texture and kind of projects that across the geometry. This works better in, at least my take is, it works better in Maya software and you get better render times, but whenever I use them in Mental ray, I find I get higher render times. So I use ray trace shadows. And let's start to talk about this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these on. And this will actually get me shadow casting off this light as I'm using it. So we have two sections in here. We have shadow rays, and we have ray depth limit. So shadow rays are, remember how I was talking about light rays coming and bouncing off the things? This is how many rays we're sending out of this to calculate what the lighting is. So the less rays, the faster this will render, but the worse it'll look, the less accurate it'll be. We want a ton of rays if we want to be really accurate, but that won't be efficient. So kind of the numbers I use to test everything out with at first, because when you start to add enough of these, you won't be really able to tell the low quality sometimes. I'll use 5 rays to sample the scene. And what ray depth limit is how many times those rays bounce before they stop. They just, they disappear. They're done. They bounce twice to sample colors or whatever, and then they're done. And for regular objects, usually 2 bounces is fine, and that's the number I'll start with. If it's going through glass or it needs to be around a lot of reflective objects, I'll turn this up higher. But 5 and 2 is generally my starting numbers. But when I finally render, I'll probably turn this up to 15 and this up to 5 at least. But for now, this is enough to start to see what it is to get me the numbers I need. Tweak. So let's open up our render view here. Which one's which? There we go. And I could click render again. And actually, let me start just talking about some of the other render features in here. So I could click render here. That's the same as this button here. And it's going to render whatever camera was last active or currently active if you haven't rendered anything yet. That will render the whole picture again. If I want to save time, and it's like really I'm just kind of focused on this guy, there's this guy right here. And if I just marquee any section in here, well, now I can click that little red box, the same clapboard but the little red box. It's only going to render that section. So I don't have to spend time rendering all the walls and floor that I'm not too worried about. I'm mostly worried about how much is it lighting this guy up. And to me, that's probably pretty bright at the moment. It's taking away too many shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this down some. So if I go over here to intensity, I can turn it down a bit. Let's start 0.5 to start with. The other thing I'm going to do is, it's a little warm right now, so I'm going to make it just a slightly cooler color, I think. And again, with lights, if I do this, it'll just look like it dumped a bucket of blue paint on everything. So a little bit of color goes a long way when it comes to light. So, and I'll add more stuff in later, but let's see how that looks. So not bad. I'm still going to take it down a lot because this is still only one light. I'm going to try. I want something a little bit more subtle for right now. I feel like I'm losing too much of that mood there from the sunlight. And you see how much faster this renders because I'm only rendering this part. If I want to see the whole thing later, I can, but for now, I'm keeping it low. So, I'm going to take this down to 0.1. And I'm going to save this actually to make sure I can see the difference, because sometimes when right now I can't really notice much of a difference unless I switch back and forth. So, click the save button again. It'll save the whole image, but it's just that part I'm curious about. And yeah, you can see it's slightly darker. So let's go with this for now. If I don't like it, I'll turn it down even more later. But that's a good start. So I don't know if I need a fill light. I don't know. It's doing a lot of it right there. I swear this is different than last time, but whatever. This is fine. See, maybe I'm confusing these two lights. Maybe, let me check something. So I think there's 2 versions of this light. I'm gonna make a spotlight here. go ahead and pull this up, and I'm going to scale it up so I can see it. Let me see something on here. Yeah, maybe that's what I used to do, is turn this into an area light. Well, we're not going to do that. So there's another way to do this, and it's a slightly different light, but you can turn a spotlight into an area light, and it renders slightly different, but you can control some of the sample stuff. But we're going to leave this guy for right now, and I'm not going to use this as an area light. I want to get a little bit more light coming from his back. I feel like I like the light coming in through the window, but I want more inside the room. It's not enough yet. So I'm just moving this regularly, and so I'm going to use the manipulator tool here now, and this gives me some more options on the light. So here's your toolbar all the way down here, second from the bottom, manipulator tool. And you see my tool changes. I get two translate tools now, and this little guy down here. So first thing is, now I could aim this light. So if I want it to point at him, I can move this point over there, and that's where it's going to aim. And I'm going to kind of move this by the window, but it's not. It's a little bit off from the window, so I'm not getting shadows cast onto there or anything like that. And let's see. Okay, let me go back here first. By clicking this little guy down here, it gives me different options for the light. So I'm clicking it once. That gives me the manipulator, or the double transform tool to aim it. Click on it a second time, I get that. I can't remember what that other thing is, like a pivot pointer, something you can lock. This is the next one I'm interested in. It lets me change the cone angle. And this is, you can see this is all settings I can change in here, but I'm going to make it nice, something wide. And then here, this is kind of the pre-numbing angle, and this is kind of like how it falls off. So like, think of this kind of like the hot spot of, it's falling off solid in here, falling off into here to some extent, but then there's also drop off, and you see, usually it updates in there. This is a softer edge, but maybe that's kind of what I'm already doing, so I'll turn this up just a little bit here. And again, I'm going to go down to the shadow settings and turn on use ray trace shadows, and turn this up to 5 and 2 again. And so light radius is also, maybe this is what I'm thinking about. Yeah, it doesn't update in there, but this is kind of the same thing. This is how much fall off there is on the light. So I'm going to get really hard shadows at first with this. If I want to soften up those shadows, I need to turn this up. And I think I start on, can't remember if I started on 1 or 5 on this. We'll try some stuff out and see how it looks. And actually really, I should grab this light and add shadows onto it too, because I'm not sure that. So here's what happens. If I don't have shadows on this, I don't know that there's anything to stop this light from going through this wall. Maybe my scene's a lot brighter than I actually think. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on shadows so that I'm sure that this wall is actually occluding things the way that I want. Again, because we're outdoors here and it's not just casting where I'm pointing it, it's casting the whole scene. I'm going to make this one a lot higher to start with. So shadow rays, 15. It's going through glass, it's got to be bounced around, so I'm going to say, I don't know, 8 bounce times is the limit there, the ray depth limit. So let's try that, and I'm going to go ahead and render the whole scene here again. And sooner or later here, I'm going to cut you guys off from actually having to watch this. But we're going to do this one so you kind of see the overall lighting that's happening here. Oh, you know what? I'm going to cancel this. So I'm hitting escape. That lets me cancel my render. Some idiot is rendering his scene without a certain wall that he built to block light on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on, and we should see a darker room, I'm guessing, right now. Back in camera 1. Okay, I'm going to hit render again and see what happens. That might be why everything was looking brighter than I was thinking here just now. Going, what's going on? But I got this open wall, so it'd be like how bright your room would be if you just took a wall off of it in a sunny day and all this light's flooding in, and the sun's on the other side of your house. Yeah, that already looks a little bit darker. So you could already start to see like how much not having that wall there affects something like this. This is starting to get a little bit more in the realistic realm of light. Of like, yeah, it's not a closed box, so light's able to bounce off of things and come in. It's not actually bouncing off of things. It's just that physical sky kind of helps light stuff. So, but you could already see that and I think my render times were better than this last time. I think part of it is I'm running Camtasia right now, recording this as I go. So that's going to slow things down because it's eating up some of my processor. Your render times will vary depending on the hardware you have. And it looks like I'm probably getting some horrible shadows because I haven't turned up that fall off on. I think that's what's going on there. That might just be some. I wonder if it's doing final gather right now with the indirect light on. If you guys haven't gathered, I don't actually know everything about lighting. I know some stuff enough to get by, but it served me pretty well. So, and there's stuff I used to know that I've forgotten because I haven't used it enough. So, but the best part is it's still out online somewhere or in the help file. So there's always some way to go relearn this stuff whenever you do forget it. So you'll kind of notice as it's rendering right now, it's all blotchy at first, and then it'll fill in with a smoother version. That's it, kind of calculating this indirect lighting that's going on, of kind of saying like, well, light's bouncing off from one thing to another, so it's not completely in darkness here, even though the light rays aren't hitting it. If we were just using lights and we didn't have this indirect sky, we'd have a lot harsher shadows already at this point. We'd have to do a whole lot more work to soften those up, which may be what you have to do if you're in an interior that doesn't have sunlight coming in, because this may or may not look natural in that setting otherwise. So, okay, here we go, starting to wrap up. Really curious what's going to happen in the window over there. I think that's just having to do with some reflection stuff. Nope, that's actually casting shadows there. That's got to be from our light. Okay, so we're going to do a little something here. And I want to see this update in real time as much as possible. And in this case, it's going to be slow, but this is more for demo than it is for, practicality at this point. It's probably something I should have done earlier. But so here we have this button called IPR render. IPR render will update real time, but it needs to calculate once first. So I'm going to hit this button and render, and I'm just going to hit pause so you guys don't have to watch this once I hit it, and then it'll be a sudden jump for you. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this first. So actually, first it goes wireframe. The first thing I need to do is select a region for it to render, which is, in this case, the whole thing. And come on, do IPR render. Maybe this only wants part of it. Okay, this is not working the way that I remember. Refresh the IPR image. There we go. Okay. See, it's building the image right now. What it's going to do is sample it a certain way so that it could, as I change settings, I should be able to see them update real time. So I'm going to go ahead and pause this because this is going to be real boring to watch. But this is what it should start to look like. I haven't used it in a while, so that's why I'm a little bit rusty in this. So I hit that green kind of cycle button. The icons I think have changed since the last time I used it. It's been a couple of versions of mine since I last used it. So I'm going to hit pause, and then I'll come back when this is rendered already. Alright, we're back, and that's done. Okay, so I just finished my IPR render, and I think if that worked the way I actually think it did, I should be able to start changing settings on this and seeing it happen in real time. So let me go down here to light radius, and I'm going to turn this up to, I'm trying to remember what it is, turn up to 5 and see what happens here. Alright, so it's already starting to correct that stuff. You can see it's re-rendering those areas. and updating in real time. Maybe this is not the best way to be using this particular tool, but what I like about it is it shows that, hey, I could change this thing and it's updating as soon as I'm changing stuff to the scene. Within at least the red box here. So I guess that's part of the change. So you used to have a red box and a green box in older versions of Maya, and one would be IPR and the other one would be this one. And I gotta figure out what makes that black glob go away. So we're gonna move our light here a little bit and see what happens. Is that what's causing that? I didn't have this glitch the first time I did it, and it's, of course, now that I'm recording, now something different's happening than before. Alright, let's move this light back more, see what happens. Anything? There we go. Okay, weird. Must have been too forward and weird shadow things were getting cast. Alright, let's just make sure that all goes away. So, okay, that was a great case, actually, because that's me updating and going, okay, what makes this go away? And I can start to see it in real time. This is still taking a long time to render at this point. And the more I feather up the lights and all this stuff, the longer the stuff will take to render. But at a certain point, you got to start to see that stuff to be able to tell what's going on. So, all right, I'm going to cancel this. Okay, so I just hit render again, and that was a way to get it to cancel. So I think I'm happy with this. I got enough light on his back. Maybe is this light all the way up? It is. I'm gonna save this and turn this up to 1.5 and see what happens when I render his back now. I just want a little bit more sunlight from outside, and that kind of effect is what I'm going for here. So let me see if brightening that up is actually getting over to him. Oh, weird. That's not right at all. I shouldn't be. That doesn't make any sense. Alright, let me turn my drop off down and see what happens. If I turn that number up, the brightness should be going up, not down, so I'm not sure what on earth is going on. Oh, yeah. Actually, I do know what's going on, is that I move my light, so it's now casting light at a different angle. Let me jump out into perspective and see whereabouts I'm at. Oh, am I inside the wall? Is that what's going on? I am. Okay, that's what I did. Let's pull this light back out. Let's try to, one, make sure it's not actually in the curtains, but back far enough that we're not hitting the curtains either. This just gets a little bit more into stage lighting, where I'm not necessarily lighting realistic, but kind of how I want to paint the scene. So because the tip of my light was inside the wall, made everything darker. So let me open them back up the attributes here. I'll try my drop off up a little bit. I think it was around 50. And I'm going to re-render that spot. And he should be bright again. That's more like it. So I'm going to save that one because you can't really even tell the difference. Oh, yeah, that's one angle, that's the other. Okay. And what was I going to do? I wanted to make it slightly brighter. So again, 1.5. That's kind of the tricky thing of rendering only part of your scene at a time. So last thing was updating was over here, and now when I go to change the stuff, it's not rendering the way I expect. Which actually, now I need to go back and check and make sure these curtains are actually rendering right. That's better for the back. Tell me the black spots are gone there. Come on. I think this area takes longer because it has to calculate the light coming from outside, going through the glass, going through the curtain to get there. So, okay. Well, at least that's gone, I think. I'll do a full render here and again in a minute to kind of start to check it out. But getting lighting on his back the way I want. He's still really cast in shadow. I need to put a spotlight in over here, so I need to go do that next because I want the lamp on. And actually, not a spotlight. I'm going to do a point light here. So turn this wall off again so I can see what's going on. And create, where's it, light, point light. I'm just going to use my regular move tool for this. I don't need to use anything fancy here. Though it helps if it actually goes in the light, not in the wall again. So this one will work inside the model. So I need to actually say this first. So there's parts of this model that are set to be single-sided. So if we opened up the attribute editors in here before I could bind it all, look at our shape. What is it? Render stats. Is that it? Yep. Double-sided. So by default, all geometry has this on. Video games, it tends to be off, or you might have to turn it off for video games. That says there's only one side of this polygon. So if I turn this off, notice the inside of the lampshade goes away. There's just nothing there. So this will work because, well, I don't think my light bulb is double-sided, but it is glass, so it's completely transparent. And then, what key? There we go. If we look at the sphere inside there that's casting light, let's deselect everything. It's not casting shadows, it's not receiving shadows, and it's not double-sided. So it's not going to block any light in there. So that's why when I put this light in here, it is not going to not show through like our spotlight did when it went through the wall. And the lampshade's translucent, so light will come out of that too. So that's just a blend. I'm just going to point snap. Am I? Where'd my light go? I'm going to try to point snap it down. Oh, I'm stuck in the Y. There we go. Down to the light bulb. I'm going to turn on wireframe so I can kind of tell where things are at. Point snap it to that point up top so I know it's in the center. And just kind of eyeball it down here. It doesn't need to be exactly the same because we're not looking at the light bulb in our render. It just needs to be somewhere about center. Okay. So that's a good spot for it. And again, I need to do shadows because otherwise it's just going to cast through the lampshade. So, and again, I'm going to turn this one up a little bit higher. I'm going to start at 15 and let's say 5 because it has to go through all that glass. And we'll see how this ends up looking. And go back to my camera 1. And let's see, I'm going to go ahead and hit render, and I'll jump back to you guys. I'm going to render this whole thing so we get rid of, one, I'll be able to tell if anything's going on over here, but then we'll see how this is casting on here. So I'm going to hit render and pause for you. Alright, so we're back. We get the whole thing rendered. So it's not bad, it's a little bit dark, and it's casting a hard shadow here. So what I'm going to do is, let's turn the light radius up to 5, see what happens. I'm going to turn the intensity, I'm going to double it here. It's still really dark, I might get enough light for that shade. And we got some weird artifact going on here, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look through my scene again here real quick. Try to figure out where that's coming from. Hide this wall again. FYI, when I went paused, I had to turn that back on because that was missing. Let's see, so we have that light, we have that light. Let's pull this down a little bit, make sure it's on the ceiling. Check the attributes on it. Let's see, I'm just going to push this down a little bit. And I don't know, try turning the shadow rays up, see if it's from this light. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to camera 1, and before I go too far, I'm just going to marquee that little box, see if that made it go away. If that didn't, I'm going to hide one light and then hide the other to see if hiding either light makes that little artifact go away, and at least I know what light is causing that artifacting. I guess this is good. I didn't have this before, so now I got little glitches coming in, so I could show you guys how to get rid of those. Okay, good, it's gone. It was just, I think my light was up in the ceiling or something, or not enough rays, or who knows. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and render this. Well, I'll render just this part again, and we can see how that light is turning out. And when I come back, we'll check it out. Actually, first, let me go and turn my wall back on. Okay. And rendering. Alright, I'm back, but darn it, that little artifact came back. And the other thing I'm noticing is being a hard shadow from here. I'm trying to figure if that's from outside or if that's from the spotlight. So I think it's from the spotlight. So I'm going to do same render again, and I'm just going to hide the spotlight that I made, the one that's over here. If I hide it, it's not there. And so let's render this and see how that turns out again. I'm going to actually go a lot smaller. I like the ray cast on that better. You see the lampshade where it's not, when it's open, is casting a lot more light out. But I like the brightness there. But let's figure out what's giving this little artifact. And again, the less we render, the better. I'm worried about the artifact and that, but that may go away with such a small render size. Get the feeling that has something to do with maybe the translucency I have on there. This could be one of these two lights. So, okay, so it is the spotlight. It looks like it's the spotlight casting the shadow. So, wow, this thing's giving me a lot of trouble this time. It didn't last time. Okay, cone angle. I'm going to turn penumbra angle down some, and let's see. I'm going to turn this up to 20. Really, just try to blur out the shadows as much as possible, and see if that doesn't make the lamp shade so hard cast over here, but also gets rid of that artifact. Well, there's no artifact, at least. It's still pretty hard cast. So not bad. So if I don't like that shadow, there's also something we can do called. Let's go ahead and do this, because I don't like that shadow. It seems too hard cast for something casting light. We have something called light linking. This light is currently affecting all the objects in the scene. But what if I don't want it to do that? I'm going to go ahead and turn off wireframe here. So we can go up to Window. What is this under? Relationship Editors, Light Linking, and I could do light centric or object centric. So I could look at the object's point of view and say what lights do I want to affect it, or light centric and say, hey, affect these objects. We'll go light centric. Doesn't really matter in this case. I'll say Spotlight 1. Let me find my lamp. It's going to be up here. So, room. There we go. Yeah, you don't like the lamp anymore. And let me show you that again real quick. So, relationship editor, light linking, light centric or object centric. I'm starting with a spotlight and saying, all the stuff that's highlighted, it is currently affecting. So I'm going and deselecting the lamp so it doesn't actually cast shadows on it. So if I go back and look at my lamp now, it actually won't be brightening it either. So there we go. That looks a little bit more like a lamp should to me, with sunlight coming in and it, in theory, being bright. So while it seems like it's lighting the walls fine, and I like that fine, it's not. His face is still too hard in shadows, and I want to break him out more from the background. So we're going to put a backlight in there. So jumping back to my perspective camera, I'm going to get rid of this wall again so I can see what's going on. And I'm going to create another spotlight in this case. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to start with this spotlight and just duplicate it. Because that way shadow's already on, all the same settings. So I'm going to have this kind of coming from the lamp, a little bit lower. Actually, I want to kind of on his face, but I also want a smaller light. This thing is just giant. And I'm going to grab my manipulator tool and turn this cone size down some. Good, come on. There we go. Alright, so not so much in the bed. And I'm going to pull this off from the side a little bit more. So again, not particularly realistic, but you know, that's the cool thing about doing 3D is you could have lights that aren't realistic and paint the light how you want. And what was that set to? Is that set to? That was a 1.5 also. Oh, that seems on bright for that light. Weird. Okay. Well, let's try this and see if I need to adjust the angle. So, turn that off or close that window. So I'm just going to start with a quick one on his face and see if that's good. And then once I've adjusted this light so I'm happy with kind of the rim light on his face, I'll do another render of this whole scene and see how that light's affecting the scene. Oh, that's too much. Okay, so I think I need to change the angle of this light. You're not aiming right at him. And I'm going to turn this down to 1. Alright, let's try that again. Yeah, it looks like he's watching TV right now or something. Are shadows on? They're on. This seems so much brighter. Let me double check this and hide this light. I swear, I do a test run for you guys to try to make sure I get all these bugs out, and then I go do the real version, and then they just all show up. Like everything goes flawlessly the first time. I feel like I get my game plan on, and then it totally falls apart as I start doing this. Okay, no, so he's just bright all around. There's something else doing that. Oh, I know what it is. Somebody keeps forgetting to turn back on their wall. That's the part I keep screwing up. It's me, it's not the machine. Alright, let's see how much of a rim light that's giving his face with just 1 for now. Alright, that's more like it. So I need a... Yeah, I was probably more right the first time with this light. Did I... Oh, if I turn it back on, that helps too. I'm just eating up all sorts of time in this video. So we're waiting for it still. Okay, so yeah, not enough rim light. I need to move this down a little bit. I was probably better off the first time. And again, we'll try 1.5 and see what happens. So starting to get a little bit of 1, but yeah, I still want more. So let's, oops, which camera am I in? So if I hit the little brackets kind of up by my backspace key, I can undo move, but I'm pretty sure this is my, that's my perspective camera. Okay, good. Just making sure. Kind of look at where my light's hitting here. Yeah, I need it. Actually aiming up at his face more. Need to get past the terminator. So if you're looking at a sphere, like dark side of the moon, that line between the light side and the dark side, that's the terminator. So his face, this line on his nose is kind of the terminator right now of where the light isn't making it around. So I need to get just a little bit of that light starting to catch around. Let's try that and see what happens. And again, use small sprites. I mean, you see how long it's taking just to do this little section of his face. So sampling little bits and rendering is a good way to save your time and a more efficient use of it. Okay, good. Now we're starting to get rim light on his face, like as if it was coming from the lamp or something that's a little bit low. But I think I'm happy with that. So the next thing I'm going to address, so generally I'm happy with this lighting. It's not perfect yet, but there's some tweaking I could do, but it's mostly blocked out at this point. I'll need to turn up the settings for actual lighting, so I get good quality. So I don't get like this spotty look when I actually render this lamp. Something I want to add to this is something called ambient occlusion, and we talked a little bit about that. It's on the shaders in this case. And what ambient occlusion does, so real life light bounces around, and the more it bounces around, the more it lights an object. And in the cracks of things, light has less chance of hitting the area because there's less surface area to get there and something else to hit. So it gets a little bit darker around the edges of things. Like look around your house, it just gets a little bit darker, like book stacked around the edges and so on. So like this seems really bright along here. The leg seems really high in contrast to this bright blanket right there. Ambient occlusion is going to start to give us just that little bit of natural shading. So it'll be kind of hard to see here. It'll be subtle, but it really adds a lot to a scene, and in other cases it could add a ton. So what I'm going to do here is give you guys a full render of this to start with before we add ambient occlusion so we can compare. So I'm going to make sure I got my wall back up. Okay, good. That's the stuff I keep forgetting. All right, I'm going to render a whole scene here, and I'll bring you guys back when that's done. All right, and we're back. So you can see this is already taking like 5 minutes to render, 5.5 minutes to render a frame. So this is getting up there. And this is typical with when you start getting good render quality. Now there's some things you can start to do to limit this, but it's trade-offs in quality versus how soft your shadows are versus how hard they are. Light rays and all that sort of stuff, and texture size and everything relates to that. So if you have giant textures on all these, it'll take longer to render all this stuff versus having smaller textures, at least as small as you need. So all things to keep in mind, but this stuff starts adding up really quick. I think we'll be close to 10 minutes a frame near the end of this, but we'll see how we're doing. So this is before we put ambient occlusion on, and I'm going to show you. There's two places you can do this. So if you don't want to do the shader route, you go into your render settings, and where is it? Right here. Ambient occlusion, and you can turn on ambient occlusion. You'll have to play with the rays some. Cache density, cache points, but default number is a good place to start, and you'll have to tweak that to see how you like it. I'm not going to use this. I'm going to use the one on the shaders. So unfortunately, it's a little bit tedious to set up at first. In that, let's start on the first one that I wanted on. It's down here. Use ambient occlusion. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to turn the sound. So the default distance is 10 on these. I think I've already turned these all up, so I don't have to do that part again. I just got to go turn them all on, so I guess I'll do this while talking to you guys. And there's some other ways to do this. Some people do ambient occlusion and then they do it later in compositing. So if you have something like After Effects, that is a great place to do this and do everything in passes, because the great thing about doing render passes is that if one part screws up, you don't lose all that time rendering. So you'd always already have the part where you calculated the ambient occlusion done. You just have to composite it back in with whatever. If, like, say your texture wasn't good enough, you just render out your texture. You'd render out only the color pass and then go and composite it back in with specular and some other lighting stuff and whatever. Save you a lot of time that way, and that you don't have to re-render the whole scene. So like what I'm showing you right now is, say you don't have After Effects. This is kind of how you deal with this stuff of, well, here's the shader all put together, so you don't have to deal with compositing. So by the way, so this is the glass, so I'm not going to use ambient occlusion on that. I don't want it occluding things. I want light passing through it. I don't want weird shadows on it. So everything else that's solid objects, and then the translucent ones are blends. They don't have this option. Okay, almost through it all. Wait, this is, oh, that's a blend too. Okay. And then these ones I made at the beginning. It's just things I forgot to take out. Yep, okay. All right. So now those are on, so I'm going to save this so I can compare and show you guys the difference. And I think we'll mostly see it in legs and little spots, but it's one of those things that adds some realism things. And we'll see what the render time difference is, because I'm not actually sure at this moment. So you hit render again, and I'll come back in a moment, which will seem like instance right away to you. Oh, that's save. Alright, and we're back. And so this rendered again with ambient occlusion, and maybe you guys saw the difference because it jumped right away, but you see the shadows are getting occluded a little bit more there. Maybe behind the leg we're getting a little bit. It's real subtle, but like so back there, so it's occluding some light. And you'll see like around the base of things, it's getting shaded a little bit more. Around the base of the bed. So it's a little thing. I could turn it way higher if I want to and get more of that, but for my purposes, it's better. And it didn't really, it didn't change our render time at all. It's probably because the shader I'm using, it's already calculating that in some way or something. I don't know, but so there's ambient occlusion. It's the only bad thing is it's blocking that out a bit more. It seems like, but which is weird because I don't think I put ambient occlusion on that glass. Let's double check. Did I? No, that's just a blend. Weird. Oh, probably because I put it on the poster, which the glass is occluding. So, yeah. So if I wanted to, I guess I could always take it off. Let's do that because I thought it looked better without it. No, let's not do it that way. Let's go find the shader. Maybe that's Cap Hope. No ambient occlusion for you. Okay. And I am in. Okay, good. I'm switched off camera. Okay, so that's the difference between those two things. Next thing I want to address is how muted everything looks. So again, that color looks much more washed out than that. His blues are much more saturated here than they are here. So we could change the lens on this camera and make it, if you guys ever used a DSLR camera, make it a lot more like that. So I'm going to go ahead and add a lens for this. Let's see, so if I go over to cameras in here, I can find the camera that I'm using. So here's camera 1, and graphics is the only thing in here. And then under the mental ray tab under here, look for lenses. I'm going to use the MIA exposure photographic. Click that, and then I'm just going to middle mouse drag on this icon to the camera. So I'm holding down my middle mouse on this, dragging it to over here, and just do default connection. You'll see that. That'll hook it up. And with this node, if you look in here, we have a bunch of settings that are essentially giving us a DSLR camera. And oh god, I'm trying to remember what I set these all to before. Let me pause real quick and get my notes, because otherwise I'm going to send a bunch of stuff and make you guys go through this. Let me go look at my preview scene one real quick. Be right back. Alright, and back again. Okay, so we want to turn this up to something like, I think I did 2000. This is just kind of setting a scale for the scene, so we're not really dealing with something tiny, I believe. Shutter speed I think was about 50. F number about 4. I don't know if I want any. We'll leave vignetting on, see if that's alright or not. And I'll turn the gamma down to 1. So if you're familiar with like DSLR cameras or real cameras, a lot of these settings come from that. So if you're more familiar with those settings, this will mean a whole lot more. And if you want this to be more meaningful, go look up some tutorials on DSLR camera settings. But you'll be able to control your exposure and all that stuff the same way here. So I believe that should start to do with my desaturation. And to continue with the pausing on and off, I'm going to hit render here, make sure that's saved, and see what this looks like now with that lens on it. All right, go ahead and pause, come back in a second. All right, so we're back, and you can see there's a big difference here after that lens. So here it was before, here it is after, and this looks a whole lot better. And we could tweak this a whole lot more, these settings, and really blow out exposures if we want, or even out lighting, or anything you can essentially do with a DSLR camera we can do with these settings. But that really handled a lot of our muted colors there. And if there wasn't enough detail showing up in the pant legs here, I could go change these settings. But I'm going to call it good enough for now. And even looking at this, there's some stuff I'd want to do with the light, but for the sake of time, I'm probably not. I'd probably want another really subtle light coming from, pointing at him at this direction here. So it's showing just a little bit more of his face, so it isn't such hard shadow. But for the sake of our render times right now, I'm not going to do that. Oh, who am I kidding? Yes, I am, because it's going to bug me too much otherwise. So let's just go do it. So we're talking key and fill. It's almost as if my key light's all coming from the back in this case. My backlight's over here, and I need some fill light right here. So I'm going to just duplicate this light again, because a lot of the settings I'm just setting up the same every time anyway. Make sure this is pointing at his face nice and good. And I'm definitely going to turn the intensity down. I'm going to turn this from like 0.2. Make a little bit bigger cone angle here, just for the hell of it. And check my shadow rays, make sure it's nice and low. Yeah, 5 and 2. That should be fine. So I'll do that render. I'm going to hold off on that for just a second. We'll see a difference in here. So the other setting I'm going to turn on that I'm going to talk about some is Final Gather. So Final Gather kind of does bounce lighting. Simulates a different part of bounce lighting. So bounce lighting, if I have something green by the wall, it'll kind of bounce off a green light because the color off of here is bouncing off, or a little bit of blue from the wall. So there's a little bit of that's always happening with natural lighting that isn't really being accounted for in the scene yet. And as far as me showing you this stuff, this is probably a bad time to add this light because it'll change what's different. Actually, I'm gonna hide it for right now. I'm pretty sure that's gonna be good, but when I do my final render, I'll turn it back on. So let's go in here into the render settings, and I need to jump back over to quality. Oh, I'm already on preview Final Cut. Jeez, it's been on the whole time. I thought it was just on preview. Well, that would be why this is all taking longer to render than I thought it did before. It was taking about 2 minutes before my test. So, yeah. So when you're previewing this, it might have been added when the indirect sky was turned on. So let's scroll down here to where it says Final Gather. Oh yeah, geez, it's been on the whole time. Okay, tutorial in reverse. I'm going to turn this off and show you guys the difference here between render time and the look between the two on or off. So let me save this gorgeous render, and again, add that spotlight, but I'm hiding it for the moment. I'm going to render this without Final Gather on, so you can kind of see what the difference is between the two. I can't believe I had this on the whole time. I thought that was taking forever and looked like it was rendering Final Gather. You'd think I'd know better. Live demo. It always goes wrong. Anyway, I'm going to hit render again. We'll come back and we'll see what this looks like if I hadn't been doing this with Final Gather the whole time, and kind of the difference in colors. Which, if you guys are doing this, then for real, do that without Final Gather on. I can't believe I did that. So I'm going to hit render again, double check, make sure that's saved, and hit render, and I'll come back in a minute here. You know what? I'm already back. I'm turning this back on so you can see how fast this is rendering, but the difference is. So look at this render time. It's nowhere near as good, but how much light was bouncing around and lighting up everything with that on. So just gonna let this finish up here. So you can still start to block out your lighting. You can see how rough it would be at this point. But we'll jump back and forth here in a second. And again, this is the way I recommend, because I've been sitting here waiting like 5.5 minutes for each one of these renders to go, where this thing is done in, I'm gonna guess, under a minute here. I guess it probably just turned on when I did the indirect sun. I think I had turned it back off when I was doing that. Yeah, so about a minute. So back at original render times, so back around here or so. So it's really dark, it's really occluded, but you turn Final Gather on. That's the difference. That's the difference between this light bouncing around the room and blending those colors together. I should have known that when I saw those little blotchiness. And essentially what it's doing is saying, okay, sample a bunch of points around me, see what those colors are, and kind of spread those colors out based on that. So there's sample points we can turn up higher, but at least that didn't take forever to render on my side. So you can see kind of the difference, but you could start to figure out the lighting, early on, and at least place layer lighting. So I've been doing a lot of stuff to show you guys what the difference is when you set one number to another. If I was doing this for real on my own, I would set a bunch of stuff up and then do a render and then see, does this look about what I expect. But I kind of know what to expect when setting this stuff up, so I could change a whole lot more things before doing a render. And if I'm being really specific about lighting, a lot of the time I'll only have one light on at a time to see what it's doing. So I might just start with the indirect sun and then hide it, and then only do the spotlight and only light it to really figure out how it's painting the scene. Just strip away everything else to make sure that, kind of like when I hid the other lights, to make sure that that artifact was going away in the lamp. So here's kind of what we're looking at this point. I'm going to go ahead and turn the spotlight back on at this point, but really I'm going to turn this render quality up now. I'm going to turn everything up and see how we like it. So this spotlight, it's in front. I'm going to give it 10 rays. I'm going to tell it to bounce 4 times rather than just the 2. And this, again, this is getting close to final render time. I'm going to turn these all up, see if I am happy with the overall quality, get rid of all this little artifacting stuff. This spotlight's the back spotlight. I don't know that we need, again, I'll kind of go as 10 with the default everything, but 2, and we'll go 10 and 4 for the default of everything, all the spotlights. And this point light, I gotta really jack up, because again, that thing is facing all directions, unlike the spotlights. At best, you could say they're facing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forward, and 6 backward directions, kind of, and even really then some. So I'm going to up this to 100 rays, and if I don't, the spottiness is going to keep being there. So upping the rays starts to get rid of that. I'm going to up the ray depth limit to say 10, because we have, again, some glass and translucency stuff in there that it has to get through. And let's see, the spotlight. I already did that one. The area light. That one, again, is kind of high, so I'm going to, let's go, I don't know if I'm getting a whole lot of artifacting out of that, but I'm going to go 25 just to be safe, and 4 bounces. And again, the sun is not just casting in this room, but the whole scene outside. So it's essentially a big shotgun, and I need to make sure the rays are actually getting inside this room. So I'm going to also up this to 100, and I guess I'll bring that up to 10. I'm going to turn the lighting angle up to see if I can't blur the shadows just a little bit. Maybe say 2. Make sure that's on and all these other things too. Light radius, yeah, I think it's on by default, all those. Okay, so the other thing is that blotchiness is being handled by the Final Gather stuff. I want to turn the accuracy up and the point density. So remember I said it's sampling points around, so the more points it samples, the more accurate it could be, plus also the actual accuracy. So I'm trying to remember what kind of settings I want for this. I'm going to turn point density up to 20. I'll turn this up to, let's say, 500. And a lot of times I'll start high on this. Like I'll try a render and go say like let's start at 1,050, and I'll do that render and just let it go. And then I'll do something where I'll half it from that, and I'll see if there's a difference or how much of a difference is, and then I'll start to phone in. I'll just like, well, there's hardly any difference between 500 and 1,000. I'll turn it down even more and see if where the quality starts to go below the bar that I want. Because the lower I have these settings, the faster it calculates, the faster it renders. But while I'm doing these single, if this is an animation, I want to spend the time on just a single frame and figure out, what's the balance of quality that I want where I get decent render time. So you can see we're already at 5.5 minutes per frame right now, and this is on preview quality. Actually, I need to go first before I do all this. I need to go and change this to production. And every time I change these settings, it's just changing things in here to different default settings, default numbers. But it's a good place to start. So I'm going from under quality presets up top to production. Keep in mind, so I'm going to turn on final gather, but if you have things like motion blur, you need to turn on motion blur or there will be no motion blur. And motion blur takes even longer to render. And then there's settings in there for that. If you want 2D motion blur or 3D motion blur, 2D renders faster, but it's not as accurate looking, and 3D is more accurate looking, but takes longer to render. So all things to think about. If you have animation, it's going to look weird without motion blur. Like sometimes you do it in After Effects and save some time, but generally I'd say do some frames with motion blur and see how that looks as far as your time, so you can calculate in theory how long your render times are going to take. So I'm going to turn back on Final Gather now and turn up everything to kind of what I had before. I think those are the two things I change. I can't remember if I changed point interpolation, if I really want to turn that up or not. I'm going to turn that up anyway. I'm going to say, here, let's do 550, 20. I used to be so much better at this and actually remember what were good numbers to use, but play with it, like I said, and test out what works for you, what doesn't. But I'm going to turn it up, and that'll get rid of, there's a slight blotchiness on the walls that should start to get rid of it. Okay, so I think my render settings are good. After this renders, I'll start to talk about how do you actually spit out an animation, because right now we're only doing single frames, and rendering here is not the way you want to do this. But I'm not going to save that frame. So again, I'm going to render, and I'll come back when that's done. So I think I got everything on, just double checking, got all my lights on. Yeah. Okay, rendering. Alright, and we're back. And actually, we had some technical difficulties during that last render where I don't know what it was, but I turned the settings up and the frame was taking like over an hour to render, and I don't know what the deal was, and I was trying to tweak stuff and figure out what it was. It's most likely one of my lights rather than any of my settings, because every time I go and change my quality setting, it goes and resets all those settings back to default, so I don't think it was in there. But rather than remake all my lights and set that back up and try to figure out what's going on, I just went back to my test scene that I set up earlier, that in theory it should be the same setup that we had before. I think some of the settings are different on my lights because I spent more time tweaking them than I did in the demo. So I'm just going to go through and show you guys again real quick what I had here. So the point light, intensity of 2, ray trace shadows, light radius 5, shadow rays, turned it up to 100 to try to get rid of some of this graininess in here. If I want to get rid of more of that, I'd have to turn it up even higher, but some of that might also be the bump texture on the wall. Shadow rays 100, ray depth limit 8, area light, shadow rays 5, ray depth limit 2, so I left that. I think I left some of these lower, but even then, so I did this render that I have here, and this took about 21 minutes, or almost 22. And I did it once before, and I had some of the right lays turned down. I didn't have the sun turned up to 100 and the point light turned up to 100. So they were at, I don't know, 10 or 15 before, I think, something like that. I think 15 or 20, actually. So I turned them both up to 100, and so that added on, it was about 17, 18 minutes before. So it didn't add on a ton of time. So even though I had some of my light rays higher, it shouldn't end up being like a whole another 30 minutes or something like that for another 20 rays or something like that. So here's my spotlight, this one over here in the corner coming kind of from the window. Intensity of 3, light radius, shadow rays, 5, 2, 10. Um, and again, so I think I had the light brighter on this on his back originally, but the brightness shouldn't add to the render time either. This one's that kind of backlight, so 10, 5, 2 again for all those numbers. Intensity of 1 for the backlight to catch that little bit of rim light that he has there. Directional sun, I don't think I changed really anything on here. Yeah, so use rotated shadows, light angle of 5, shadow rays 100, ray depth limit 5. Maybe it's the ray depth limit that I had higher, but still that seems like it was really high. And really, I'm probably just putting in numbers too arbitrarily here. You should keep these low. That might be the thing I screwed up on. Punching stuff in here and having it too low. So those are the numbers. Oh, and so the other thing I changed was I had to go back and look at my accuracy settings. I knew those were totally off in my final gather. So still did 500, but I got these two numbers backwards. So this one was supposed to be high, and then this one, or I put this one as a high number, and this one as a lower number. I couldn't remember which way it went, and it was actually the other way around. This one goes as a high number, and this one goes in as a low, and I think me just trying to guess, I just put them both in as high, which set my render times astronomical. Like 20 minutes went by, and I had like this much of the final gather rendered. So, poor example on my part, but good example of reasons to set these numbers low and work your way up to see what it is. And I could set it up higher and go, let's throw this up to 1,000, see what happens. And if 10 minutes go by and I don't even have a quarter of my image, I go, okay, this render time just isn't going to work, and I need to find something lower. So other than that, everything is kind of the same that I had before. So the light settings are slightly different. I mean, just on amount of rays and intensity and things like that, position. But let's jump back and forth. So you can see this is a little bit brighter, but it's also a lower quality rendering. So there's a couple things a little bit different, but for the most part, essentially the same scene. And you can see the tree and the bag move because those got repositioned. But if there's a mistake, it's either in how I set up my lights or when I started with that original scene. I started with my test scene, stripped out all the lights, and saved that. So maybe I didn't turn something off. I don't know, or accidentally turn something on. But in theory, it should be the same. So good time to at least bring it up. So if you see your render times going up really high, like that, time to change something. If it's taking like an hour a frame, that's probably not realistic. Probably even if you're doing a movie. So, this is at 21 minutes 56 seconds per frame. I'd set this as kind of my benchmark, and now from here I'd start churning stuff down to see what's acceptable. And kind of handle it per light. So like if we're handling the spotlight, render just the area with the spotlight. Particularly up here, this is where I see it most. Down here, not so much. But turn down the settings and see what gets you more, faster render times versus the quality. And it's a little bit hard to say because sometimes this graininess is much more apparent during animation because it's almost like flickering. So you have to see how that works between a couple frames. What else is there? I should talk about there are other ways to light other than Final Gather. The thing I like about Final Gather is it gives us this nice kind of even balanced around lighting really well, as opposed to other methods. Another method you could use, and I'm not going to cover in here, maybe this will be a different video. Instead of using, you still have to use Ray Trace, but instead of using Final Gather, where is it? Final Ray? Alright, looking for something that's called photons. I'm sure it's like right in front of me, but it's just a checkbox that says emit photons. Where is it? I'm on a spotlight, that should have photons on it. Huh, crazy. Is it light effects? Well, that'll be for that video, but look it up. There's a way to have lights emit photons. I at least know where the render setting is. Maybe it's just they all automatically do it and it's all set universally. So, Is it photon tracing? No. Map. Or maybe it's because it's 3 versions removed since last time I've done photons that I don't know where anything is anymore. Anyway, I'll have to look into that. But just be aware there's something out there you can turn on photons for lighting. It's one of the ways that you kind of do the indirect lighting and get bounce lighting. It comes with its own set of issues. But sometimes in a pinch, I can get faster render times with that than Final Gather. But the look is slightly different. But the idea is it's kind of doing the same thing. And it's usually one or the other. You don't want to use photons and Final Gather. It doesn't make a ton of sense. But if you use, it's another way to kind of get the bounce lighting in there. So I'll have to look that up because I don't think I know how to do photons anymore looking at these settings because none of it looks familiar. Alright, so we've got a scene rendered, and again, the render times are going to be high. You'd want to try to take this as low as you could before you actually start rendering all your frames. But let's say we're running with this. This is the thing that we like. We like this look. We're going to go ahead with it. To render for animations is a little bit different because so far we've been rendering in the render view, and this is getting us single frames, but it's not a good way to render out entire animations. For that, we're going to do a batch render, but first we need to set up the settings. So we got our quality settings the way we want, our indirect lighting. So we need to go back here to our common tab, and I'm in my render settings here. And there's a bunch of stuff we need to set in here. So I'm just going to start from the top and work my way down. File prefix name. This is what the scene's going to be called. So I don't know. Lighting test, I'm going to call this one. So all my frames that I spit out will be called lighting test, and then if they're numbered or whatever, lighting test 01, 02, 03, dot whatever, dot JPEG, dot PNG, whatever I want. So right down here is the file format. So by default, it's always set to my FFF. I don't think I ever use this because okay, I actually need to talk about this first. So in here there is AVI. So if you want to render out a movie, where is it? I'm looking right at it and I'm missing it. Where is it? Is there not AVI anymore? Oh, that's why, 'cause my settings. Let's see. Let's go. Let's jump down here. So frame animation extension. So we want to change how this is named typically, and usually I use name underscore number dot extension. So that's going to be light test underscore 0, 1, 0, 2. The frame number. So whatever frame that's on, and then extension dot IFF in this case. So now I think that I changed that. If I go in here, it should be AVI because I'm not set to something that's single frame. Really, it's not in here. Oh wow, this coming back here, all of a sudden this is not going well. I know I just saw this the other day. I don't know why this isn't in here. Well, whatever. So even if you do render AVI, I don't ever recommend it. So maybe for the best it's not in there. The reason you don't want to render out an AVI is because all sorts of things could happen between when you start that render to where it finishes. Maya could run out of memory and not be able to finish. Maya could crash. I don't know if you're on a desktop, the power goes out. Or more practical, maybe you're rendering an animation and 90% of it's fine, but only 10% of it's something's wrong. You got to go change something, and then you could, in theory, just re-render that part and save all your other stuff. And the way you do that is render it out as a single frame. So I usually use like Targa or PNG, something that has alpha maps on it. But I think Targa is what I usually use. And then use something like Premiere or After Effects to go stitch this all together. If you go into Premiere, there's a setting when you open it that says Open as Sequence. It's usually in the File Open or File Import section. You check that box on, and all you have to do is open up the first frame of your sequence that you render out, and it loads up all the frames in a movie that you can then spit out as animation. But almost everybody I know renders out that way. If there was AVI in here, which I don't know why there isn't, because I swear I just looked at this the other day. Weird. Even if you did, you don't want to do it because there's too much to go wrong. If your render gets 90% of the way through and something happens, you've lost all that time. So it's not the best idea. Let's see. So set your file format, set your file name and extension. Frame padding, you do want to use frame padding. So what frame padding is, and so I'll put like 2, and so watch up here as I have 1 for my frame padding, so it just goes light test 1, 2, it's rendering frames 1 through 10 right now, and it's literally just doing 1 through 10. If I add 2 frame padding, now it does 0, 1 to 10. Do 3, 0, 0, 1 to 0, 10. The reason you want this is because some programs, say like Premiere or After Effects, read files alphabetically, and it just looks at the first number and goes, does it start with a 0? Okay, great. Or does it start with a 1? So if we had 100 frames like this, the way Premiere would count it would be, okay, the first frame is 1, second frame is 10, frame after that 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and then frame 100. Next frame is frame 2, frame 20, frame 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. Next frame is 200. Because it's just starting with 1 or 2 or whatever it actually begins with is how it decides. So we want to give it frame padding. So if you go up to the tens or hundreds place, that's how many zeros you have there to pad it out. And that way, when Premiere reads this, it goes, okay, this is frame 1, 001, 002, 003, 004, and actually reads it in order. So really important to make sure to turn this up. So those are kind of the main things in file output that we want. Down here we got a frame range. You can tell Maya how many frames to render. Usually all you need to do is do start frame and end frame. So if we're running from 1 to, I don't know, 24 in this case, I just set it to 24. And this is, when something goes wrong or you just need to render a section of like, yeah, frames 14 through 18 needed to work. I tweaked that, so now I'm just rendering back out frames 14 through 18, and it'll render over what I had there previously because the names haven't changed, and then my animation works. And when I go to Premiere, those frames automatically update, and my movie looks good. In here, you're telling it which camera to render. In this case, we want camera 1. Frame size, so and this is probably something you want to set before you start framing your scene. So if you're doing an HD render, you get your proportions right, because see what just happened back over here. I'm on 640 by 480 before. So if like 320 by 240 is the same proportionally as 640 by 480. So if we switch between it, the box stays the same. It's just going to be a smaller resolution. But when we jump up to HD size, what was it, 180 by 19 something, I can't remember. It goes widescreen. So different framing now than I had before. So keep that in mind. That's something you want to look at first. Oh, here it is, 1920 by 1080. If you want, you can change your resolution. So if you're doing something for print, you can turn this up to 300 DPI or whatever you want for there. And that's mostly it. So that's setting up what you're going to render. So let's say if this is 1 through 24, that would now render my whole timeline and make it look like this with whatever animation I have on. Now to actually render it, you're going to do something called a batch render. And so to find that, we're going to go to rendering, render, and batch render. So you check that, and then it starts, window will pop up, and it starts batch rendering your scene, and you walk away while it's rendering. I want to go in here to the options real quick because there's a setting in here that should be working, but it never really does. And this one looks different too. Until ready batch. Oh, okay, so auto render threads. I think that's the one that. Is that the one I want? We have 2 threads, auto tiling. I swear, again, I was just helping someone with this the other day and it looks different. I wonder if it's because I'm in 2002 and then it jumped back in 2013. Well, actually, I think now it might be fine. So if you have an older version, just check this out. If it says anything about using all available processors and that's checked on, uncheck it and specify exactly how many processors your computer has, because it's been my experience that when rendering that it doesn't actually use all the processors until that's unchecked and you tell it, no, I actually have 8 cores, use all those. Let's start rendering this real quick and find it. Oh, by the way, so your frames are going to spit out wherever you have your project set. So currently I have my project set to the folder this project's in. But if you need to do set project, figure out where you want these to save, and set that project there, and it'll start spitting out the frames there. Otherwise, you don't know where it's going to spit. Typically, if you haven't set a project, it spits out to your documents folder. There's a Maya folder in there, like default projects or something like that. And somewhere in there, there's going to be your images if you don't define it. And if you have defined a project before, you get to guess which one you left it at. But you can see right here, it's telling me where it's going to save my images to currently. So let's go ahead and do, let me click batch render and close. Apparently I need to allow my firewall to have batch render here. And so I'm going to open up the task manager, and this is the thing you keep your eye on to tell if your processor's using everything it can. And I look at this and go, no, it's not. It is not maxing out right now. It's only using 11 to 16% of my CPU. So if I want to stop this, I could go render, cancel batch render. Tells me one's currently going. Say yes, and it's got to be something in here. I'm betting this is essentially the same. So render threads, that turned up to 8. Let's see, what do I have? I have 16, is that what it is? And I've got to go look this up. You'd have to go look this up for your processor. So if you're not sure what you have, go to My Computer, right-click on it, go to Properties, wait for Properties to launch. You can see what kind of processor you have here, and you can go look up more information on it as need be. But it used to say cores. Maybe that's not what I want. Let me try that. And auto tiling, sure. Do batch render and close. And it might be different. I can't recall this if when it's doing the final gather stuff. Nope, there it's maxed out. So you can see, it said auto tile, but basically what that does is let me render and still surf the web or whatever. Now it's maxing out my CPU, so this should render faster, but I can't really do anything on my computer while it's doing this. So make sure this you're utilizing your time, because if it's not using all your processor, your render times are going to take longer. So and then if you want to see what it's doing, you can look in the script editor, and the final gather part will take forever to start showing up, but then it'll start explaining what percentage it's going through per frame. And if you watch your clock, wait to see how long it takes to get through a frame, you can start to get a guesstimate of how long it's going to take to render this whole thing as it's going. But this becomes a slow, boring, long process to watch, and usually a good time to go walk away, go for a movie or something, turn this on overnight or whatever. And if you're not sure how long your whole animation is going to take, if it's doable or not, that's usually what I recommend is set this up before you go to bed. Start it rendering and just see how far it gets overnight. If it gets a good halfway through, then you're probably good. If it gets done overnight, then awesome. If it's like a frame and a half in overnight, time to stop and figure out what your settings need to be to get something realistic. And it's turning down the quality, but there's other ways to light scenes. So this is just one method I've started to show. I'll try to look into showing photons, because that's another good way to do stuff. I could get some decent render times down there. I think I recalled around 5 minutes or so per frame last time I tried this with something about this much stuff. But the settings have changed, and I don't know where anything is anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this, because I don't need to actually render any animation. And so one other thing I want to mention is, if you do have a scene that is really high and you're just going like, no, the render quality needs to be this, but my machine is not good enough. Really, when you're rendering animation to look this good, a desktop PC or a laptop is really not the thing to be rendering it on. Some sort of render server that has a ton of cores in it. I know some guys that do rendering often, and they have some sort of desktop rig that has 16 cores in it, or 19 cores, or whatever that they've put into it. There's render servers you can get if you're doing this professionally, but I don't recommend it if you're just doing this for yourself. It's not worth the cost. The other thing is, there are services out there that will render this stuff for you. So you can go around and search out there and see If you set up your project so that you set your project so all your textures are referenced to that project, you could send that whole project off to this company. They'll render your scene for you and be able to send it back to you, hopefully like overnight or so. Whenever they could get to it. You'll have to check with them like that. I wouldn't ever do it last minute, but they could get results in a day because they have a giant render farm there that just spits this stuff out. So that's another option too if you're looking to do something quick or something professionally, and the prices are usually pretty reasonable. You get a quote from them before you do it to see, and just FYI, the quotes are estimates because the first few scenes might be fine, but then you get really heavy motion blur like middle in, and then everything takes twice as long to render. So depending what's in your scene, or you hit something really heavy, or you hit the object that has the gigantic textures on it, or whatever. So there's a lot of factors that could slow down your scene from rendering, but that's another option too for getting your scene done if time's a factor. And I've heard some people do like a minute or two clip and be able to get their render back for I don't know, $40 to $70, I think. Which is pretty reasonable when, if you look at your CPU and you just left your computer running for a week and it may or may not be done with it, well, now you may not have your scene, plus you haven't had your computer to use for the last week because it's been rendering. So the only other thing I can think of to mention to you guys is sometimes you do get memory leaks. So the longer your render is going, the worse performance you get, and the frames just take longer. So sometimes it's great to do something like, I'm only gonna, for a longer animation, maybe only render like 50 frames or 100 frames before you stop, and then quit Maya, restart your computer, turn it back on, and then do the next 50 frames after that. And I've found sometimes that gets me better render times too. So I think that's it. Sorry for the little things that went wrong there. There's a ton of lighting, and troubleshooting it can take a while, and hopefully that becomes a little bit more apparent. If you notice my clock down here, it went from one day to the next as I sat there waiting for render times and just went, okay, I don't have enough time tonight to deal with this anymore. I'll deal with it tomorrow. But opened up my test scene. It's like, no, this one's fast, and the lights are pretty much all set the same. I don't know what I did other than maybe just turn some numbers up too high, or like you saw the glitching that happened over here in the curtains. Maybe I just had a light inside of something, and that was making for really complicated solving somewhere. Who knows? If that was the case, I'd start stripping out lights to see when the render time sped back up and recreate everything. But I already had the scene set up that was working, so I just jumped over to it for the sake of time. With essentially the same setup. I got one other light in here because I was playing with a directional light as opposed to the physical sun, but it wasn't making a huge hit in the difference in render times because it's the final gather eating up all the time, not the physical sky. So that's it. Hope you guys picked up something out of this at least, and I'll see you next lesson, and enjoy.